So on the agenda, the first thing on the agenda I put was Kubernetes 119 support. So I started working on this, and Cindy's helping out with the client Go updates. And one thing, so I wanted to mention, like this will be in the next release. Like I think we're on track for it to be in the next release, which is great. We'll sort of move everything up. I think we did realize this time around, like I checked prior to the last release if we should update, and the answer at the time was no. But then, like if you look at like the timing of when our release happens versus like when the cloud provider's updated, like we kind of hit an awkward spot where at the beginning of our release cycle, according to our policy, it wasn't time to update. But by about halfway to 2/3 through, it was, but it was kind of too late for us to finish the work. And then like now we're hitting like the EOL for 118 on AKS really soon. Right. And so it's really important for us to get 119 support, but this does kind of make me wonder if we should start to think about our policy and maybe changing it, because the skew between the different cloud providers has gotten a lot wider than it used to be.
Yep. I guess the question, I think wow, that's a tough one, because like we have this 6-week cycle.
Yes.
And like that works for a lot of good reasons, but like I don't know, is there a perfect system? I guess you were talking, like you and I were talking offline, I think Ilker was there too, about like maybe testing more versions or being +1 or something. Is that sort of where your head's going?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, is like it feels like where we're heading. I think the cloud providers used to have a little bit of a tighter cluster in terms of version support. AKS seems to be the farthest ahead in general. Like they seem to adopt things quickest, with GKE and EKS being a little bit slower. GKE does pick up stuff a lot faster, like on like the rapid channel, if you're using the release channels, if you want the newer version. But if you're looking at getting one on the no channel version or on the regular or stable channels, it takes a little bit of time for them to sort of percolate down. And so yeah, kind of where I was going with this was I was going to ask, and Sean, you're the only person that doesn't work at Google here, so I'll ask you, like if we looked at sort of widening the range of Kubernetes versions that we supported, is that something that would be of some interest, of no interest, or of like great interest to you as like a user of Agones?
So for us, I know recently we hadn't been paying attention to the release schedule for Kubernetes on GKE, and we went and stood up a new cluster, and all of a sudden our Terraform was complaining like,
oh, you were talking about that.
I can't find 1.18. Don't know what you're talking about. And it's because we were on the regular channel, and regular had updated to 1.19 in June.
That's what that was.
And we already had like another cluster that self-updated itself to 1.19. So once one of them hits 1.19, none of the other ones can go to 1.18.
I see. Yeah, so this is something I've noticed with the regular channel. Generally doesn't give you pretty much any choice in terms of versions. So I think if you're creating clusters on the regular channel, the idea is for you not to actually pick a version. It's just for you to say, put me on the regular channel and Google will give me a version. Like that's sort of the intent of the release channels. And if you're specifying explicit versions, you're kind of in the I don't want to be on a release channel bucket. And you should not use the release channels is sort of the way I read like how the release channels work. Like if you want a very specific version, you should ask for that version without a release channel. And if you want to be on the regular release channel, you should take the version out of your Terraform, because every time that version changes on the channel, your Terraform will break, right? Because they really only offer like a very narrow band. And I think it's every time I've checked, and they offer either 1 or 2 versions on the release channel, but they're the same minor version. They're just different patch versions. And so if you're specifying a specific minor version, you're going to break every single time a new version gets pushed to the release channel, to the regular channel.
I think in this case, it was useful for us because then we started paying attention. But yeah, I understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, so I think so that's an interesting thing that you mentioned. I think the supported versions that you can specify explicitly on the I'm not on a release channel, I think they call it no channel or static versions, is a little bit wider. They'll support some stuff that's slightly older. I think you still can create 117 clusters there and 118 clusters, although 117 will probably be gone pretty soon, in addition to the 119 clusters. So, And the other thing that I've noticed recently about the release channels is that you cannot turn off node auto updates on the release channels. And that's something that we're looking at how to better support node auto updates. If you look at the best practices install guide right now, it tells you to turn them off on your node pools, because right now we don't have a way to prevent a node update from taking down an allocated game server, right? And sort of the whole point of Agones is don't take out allocated game servers, right? That's we spend a lot of time doing everything we can to keep them running, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work with GKE's node auto updates. Because right now, I think it will work in some cases, but I don't think we can guarantee that it will work in general.
Cool. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think
what Mark was mentioning was like what we're looking at is saying like right now we say this version of Agones supports this version of Kubernetes, and could we say this version of Agones supports this 2 or even these 3 versions of Kubernetes to give people a little bit more flexibility, and that would allow us to both support the newer versions that are coming on platforms like AKS, and more gracefully do support of things like when GKE or EKS drops a new version as the default in the regular channel or as the default in the node channel. If your Terraform just says like, give me stuff in the regular channel, it'd be nice if that sort of always worked, right? With a release of Agones, right? And right now it doesn't, because the cadence of when GKE pushes a new version or when EKS pushes a new version is desynchronized from the Agones releases, because we sort of wait until after that, and then you've got 4 to 6 weeks, and then we support that version, right? And so it'd be really nice if we had already supported that version to the extent that when it became the default, it just worked, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. That'd be nice to have.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're thinking about, and trying to figure out what the mechanics of that would look like in terms of test infra and actually being able to verify that things are working. So it sounds like that would have probably helped you in this case if the GKE version, when it switched in the regular channel, was still a version that was supported by Agones.
Yeah, we had run tests, and without knowing that our other clusters had been updated and everything worked for us still. But
yes.
It'd be nice. It'd be much more comforting to know that officially Agones supported the next version up.
Right, and I think that's the thing is like we have an intuition that for the most part it should just work, right, across, maybe not across like 3 or 4 minor versions of Kubernetes, but across a couple of versions, like +1, -1, I think will generally work pretty well. We just don't actually test it, so if something does break, we're not going to notice until a user tries it. We've definitely seen cases where like if we're running Agones, or Kubernetes 1.16 and somebody tries it on Kubernetes 1.20, that something is different and broken. But generally within like 1 minor version, things should for the most part work. So we have hit cases also in the past where we haven't actually updated the API versions we're using until we have to, which means that like the +1 version doesn't necessarily always work. And so that's where testing would catch that immediately, right? Because the test would start to fail, and we'd be able to fix those things a little bit earlier and have better support. So that was kind of like the sort of secondary reason that I put this on the meeting agenda, was both to mention that 119 was coming, but also to sort of start the conversation about widening that band of supported versions. So thanks for bringing that up, Mark. All right, and with that, let's go to the next item, so I put these next 2 on here for you, Mark, just so that you can sort of,
no, that's fine.
Talk about the things that you're working on.
Sweet. So advanced allocations, so being able to do reallocations or allocations based on player counts is well underway, which is good. And thank you to Robbie for reviewing all my code as well and pointing out where I write very scary things apparently sometimes. So that's, I've got a couple of PRs in. I've got a bunch of work. Basically, usually just for context, I usually do a ton of work and then I try and pull it apart and then put it into small PRs so that like I can do the exploratory work first, and then I think I can chunk things out into a somewhat reasonably sized pull requests. So
I've just seen like the first pull request. How many do you think it's going to be, and do you think that enough of them will get in before the next release cut that they'll be like a fully functional thing for people to test with the feature gate turned on?
Yeah, I think we should hit the next release. So I've got this. There's a refactor of the game server state that'll probably next. It may split out the end-to-end tests into their own PR just because it's a bit easier. and then combine that with the feature flags once that's ready to go. And then after that, I'm doing the proto changes, Ilker, which I'll forward you on for like the allocation endpoint, which I have some questions about too for making sure that stays backward compatible. And then roll the end tests out for that as well. So, and then I have plans for how I do the documentation and that kind of stuff, which can slowly roll out if need be as well. But on my end, the game server allocation CRD is like all done and like working. So now I just need to take it apart and push it through. So like it's doing that for game server state. So you can do both ready and allocated, you can do preferred, you can do player counts, you can do combinations of the above. Like that all kind of works, which is super cool. So I just need to get it chunked and reviewed, make that pretty. So I will say everything. I'll say CRD. So game server.
Let me just put everything in quotes.
Okay, that works. So yeah, it's looking good. Yeah, so that's making me very happy. I'll be very happy once that's in.
So my quick question.
Yeah.
When let's say there's a capacity of 10, and like maybe already 5 of them already taken, and the 5 gamers are playing the game in that section, and there's a request comes in, hey, I need a game server with 3, I mean, at least have 3 more capacity.
Yep.
So which this game server has. So when this gets allocated, like who increased that the 3? Is it still the matchmaker goes and adds those 3? Or
the game server does it through the SDK. So once players are connected and it's happy and it's like, yeah, I've got the players connected, I'm going to add them.
Okay.
There are always going to be race conditions here. And like, that's just, I think, a reality. Like, I don't think
that's a reality, but it's just that the allocation will just the best effort, right? Looking at, it looks like you have enough capacity here.
Yeah.
So I will give this to you, and matchmaker will direct them to this game server.
Yep.
Or connect them, and then the SDK, as the connections coming in, it will go increase. Maybe at that time, maybe 2 people dropped off, right? Like the number will fluctuate.
Exactly.
In real time. Okay.
And the interesting thing, so the SDK itself keeps an in-memory track, so it's always up to date. We sort of built it that way. So like you can always go back to the SDK and be like, how many do I have? And you know that's up to date. Whereas like the CRD gets batched and like may have a slight delay on it, and we document that so that people are aware.
Okay, so like then does SDK updates every time there's a change happened, increase, decrease, or the controller keeps pulling it from the SDK?
Yeah, so the SDK will update. I think it's currently set to once every second. That seemed like a good number to start with. So it keeps an in-memory state for like if you're just querying the SDK from within the game server, so like you can check. But then yeah, it'll batch up so that like if 1,000 people join, you're not getting 1,000 API requests.
I see.
Yeah.
And then, ultimately CRD caps it the last minute or last seconds, whatever the last update is, how many counts of like, the game server gamers in that session.
I had a question about the feature of allocating a game server, getting players into a game server that already has players. What's the use case for that compared to like the backfill use case for backfill feature with like open mesh?
I haven't played with backfill. I think it would probably be, and you probably understand it much better than I do. I think it'll be an integration question. So rather than like a game server itself making a request for backfill, you could have a regular thing that just goes, hey, do I have enough room for these number of players? Oh, I do. Then do a backfill. Or like go and query it or something like that. It just depends on how you want to make those two things work together.
Okay, because you were talking about there, I was just thinking you were saying that there could be that race condition where like, you know, one person goes in and says, you know, I want a game server that has like 3 open spots. Okay, we found one. You get directed over there. In the meantime, someone else also gets directed over there also because the game server hasn't reported that the people have arrived yet.
Yeah, there's some cute tricks in here that you can also do. Where and it's something that's in the ticket where you can kind of use a label to put it into the backfill pool or pull it out. So like you might do you might have like, hey, I'm ready for new things because it's got like a label like backfill true, right? Like something like that. And then when you do your allocation and that reallocation request, you can set it in the allocation request to flip that over to false. So it's going to take that, pull it out of the pool. So it's not going to get reallocated again until that game server takes in some people, maybe looks at itself and says, okay, maybe I'm willing to put myself back in the backfill pool by flipping that bid on myself. And then it puts it back in the pool. And so it can kind of manage some of those race conditions in and of itself because it's aware of what players are connected and what state it's in and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I guess the other part of that is like, if you say you expect 3 more players to connect, they may or may not actually show up.
Yeah.
Right. So the game server is authoritative on like how many people actually joined and whether or not it's still looking for more. So like that label trick gives it a way to sort of communicate bidirectionally with the matchmaker. Matchmaker says, hey, you should get 3 more people. I think that'll fill you up. And then maybe only one of those people actually joins, and the game server says, hey, I still need 2. Like, let me put myself back in the pool. I need 2 more people. Right.
Yeah. So as soon as it hears from the matchmaker that more people are coming, it flips the label, says, okay, no more backfill. And then after a while, if the people don't arrive, then it flips the label back.
Yeah. So that'd be the game server logic is like the allocation request can flip the label to say, take it out of the backfill pool. And then the game server could put itself back in that pool if the people don't show up or if it needs more than what it was given.
Yeah.
I see.
And the game server itself can watch its own configuration and be like, oh, I can see I've been reallocated, because there's various ways it can do that. And then be like, oh, okay, now I can see like maybe there's some data that you pass along with it, like how many players you want. Again, like the design's really flexible, but I need to write, one of the things I want to do with this is kind of write a series of like guides or solutions. I'm looking for the right word of like, in this scenario, like if you're doing a backfill operation, like what would that look like? I'm doing a MMO type persistent world. What does that look like? I want to do like that, like take some of the stuff that we have, like we have that game server lifecycle doc, and just split that out into like a whole variety of different allocation and like auto scaling strategies and stuff like that too.
Okay. Yeah, I think the backfill equivalent in OpenMatch is like you've got a game server that was allocated, it has people in it. Maybe it's like a lobby type server. The game server knows that it needs more people in it. It makes a request to OpenMatch to open up a backfill for it. Those backfill requests get included in the matchmaking process. And as soon as the OpenMatch sees that there's additional people that could go on to that backfill ticket, it updates the backfill ticket with like the number of slots being taken up. And then when the game server goes and checks on the backfill ticket in OpenMatch, it sees, oh, more people were put in there. And also the next round of like matchmaking shows that there's fewer slots as well.
Yep.
So it's a little bit quicker of like it's a little bit more tighter loop there.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that pans out, because then now you can do stuff like, just give me a game server that's got room for 5 people. Whether it's allocated or not, like you can do that kind of stuff. And so again, depending on your game and how you want to do it, then you have lots of options, which is good. Or like especially for lobby servers, you can be like, make sure I always have capacity for 100 people. Like once we have the auto scaling based on player count, and you can start doing that kind of stuff, which I think is super nice too.
Yeah, that's very handy. So it'll keep track of like, okay, I have this many game servers that are allocated. I see the population is, reaching a critical level, and all of them, I'll start making some new game servers
for more room. Yeah, like our pack strategy also keeps, actually worth noting, like the pack strategy also looks at like which are the most full game servers. So let's fill those up first, rather than like the empty ones, or like you want to distribute it, like you can do it that way too. So there's lots of interesting options. Like we can do some more opinionated or like intelligent routing of players that way too.
Good stuff.
It's gonna be fun.
Awesome. So the next thing I put on here as just sort of FYI, which is the Rust SDK is being updated to use a different gRPC library. And that PR now has been rebase marked. So we should merge that before I look at your PR again. Yes. They're in a different time zone and we're playing.
Should I do that now?
Update the branch. If you're maybe you may take a quick look at it, but yeah.
I think I've already
wanted to just question really quick for you, since you did review it. Does it change the SDK where you'd have to rebuild? I think it does, right?
Yes it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
So I don't know that anybody here is using the Rust SDK, but that's definitely something we'll call out in the release notes, which is
let me add a break to that.
If you're using the old one, it will still work, right, with the new release of Agones. But if you want to use the new Rust SDK, starting at the new version, you'll have to change your code a little bit because the API changed.
Yeah, we've done that a few
Between
times. We did that with the Unreal version and stuff too.
Yes, between the game server and the SDK, the API changed, which I think we discussed a little bit on the ticket and decided that that was reasonable because the API, the old sidecars still work with the new version of Agones, and so you can keep using the old one. And so it's okay to change the API between the game server and the SDK when it makes sense, because people don't have to like do that in lockstep with upgrading anything else.
Yep.
Cool.
Whoa, that is it. Yeah, I'm gonna merge this. It's just a rebase. I'm gonna do it now while I'm sitting here.
All right. So next on the agenda was an issue that I filed, I think earlier this week, which is a proposal to change the way we name fields in the game server allocation spec. We've been having some discussions about sort of how allocations work and what the fields mean, and I found a couple other issues that like our documentation is inconsistent. Also, I think the field names are a bit confusing. I think the implementation skewed a little bit from the initial proposal, where the names in the proposal made sense, but then if you look at what actually happens when you use the fields, the names don't make as much sense anymore. And it's kind of confusing, and we've basically sort of papered over it with some documentation. So I have a proposal to basically change the way that we name the fields, and get rid of the old ones eventually, possibly, but at least don't document the old ones anymore so people stop using them, and replace it with a new field that I think better sort of captures what we're doing in the implementation and kind of hopefully is a little bit easier to understand. So I just wanted to call that out. I know that Mark posted a link to the issue in the user's Slack channel, and I just wanted to also mention it here to kind of get it on people's radar. If people have comments, thoughts, feedback, we certainly do it in a way that's backwards compatible, so it's not going to break people. But if we're changing things, we should definitely try to change them in a way that we don't end up having to change them again in the future. And so if people have other sort of thoughts or ideas, or if they think there's a different way we should change it, I think that's what we'd sort of love to hear before embarking on trying to fix this, because I think this would certainly clean up our documentation and make the spec match the implementation in a way that makes a lot more sense conceptually to people. Cool. Let's see. So then the next thing I put on the agenda, so I found this issue while I was going through and triaging all the issues yesterday to just see if there was anything interesting to talk about. And this is something that was brought up, that I brought up quite a while ago in one of these meetings, and then filed an issue to kind of follow back on. And there were sort of three main questions, which is how long do we want to support a release for? So right now, we basically don't support old releases, right? We'll cut 1.16, and if somebody finds a bug in 1.15, we'll ask them to upgrade. If there's a critical issue in 1.16, we'll cut out hotfix. We tend to not do those, but if there's something important enough, we will. And otherwise, fixes and new features will come in 1.17. So that's sort of our de facto operating model. I think it would be nice to clearly document that somewhere, and or decide that it's not what we want. And the next question was, I guess so the issue is releases and SDKs. So we just talked a little bit about like the Rust SDK and how the old SDK will work with the new release. We should also figure out how long we want to support SDKs for. Is it the same model as releases where we're not going to go back and fix stuff? Or do we want to treat those differently, especially in cases like with the Rust SDK where we're changing it in a way that somebody can't just recompile against a new one? If there's a critical issue in an old one, how do we deal with that? And then the third question there was, how long do we keep documentation on the website? So right at the time of writing, it said the documentation went back to 0.9.0. Let me just check real quick. Oh, it still does. So the documentation still goes back to our pre 1.0 versions. And so I think at this point we can probably drop the 4 releases before 1.0. But the list starts to get pretty long in the pull down there, and so we should decide at what point do we clean that up. Do we just do it every 6 months and arbitrarily make a decision, or do we like drop one every time we cut a new release and keep a sliding window of the past M things in the list? So again, we talked about this a little while ago. I don't know if anybody has any strong opinions one way or the other. It was just something that I ran across and was like, oh, we're still sort of operating in sort of the same de facto mode as we were before, but the project's obviously a lot more mature now. We're sort of a different phase of our project life cycle. It might be time to sort of come back and bring some of these things up again.
I don't have strong opinions. I think the only opinions I have probably we want to do a one-off, like, hey, drop everything that's pre 1.0. I'm totally fine with that. Just on the documentation. Outside of that, maybe a rolling window. How many versions of Kubernetes do?
Has it happened very often that we've seen bugs in like previous versions that were like big bugs that had not been fixed in the current release? Or...
We don't tend to backfill.
You mean backport?
It's backport bugs, just
Yeah.
because either the Kubernetes version rolls forward, or we just release every 6 weeks. And if you were gonna roll up a new version, you might as well upgrade to the new version because it's the same amount of work anyway. So like, nobody's really cared. I think the only time we've ever had to do it was basically internal compliance reasons because Google stuff. I think it's basically the only time we've ever had to do it.
I thought I saw one a long time ago also for a security fix.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that would be a case where, as Mark was saying, like maybe it's the same amount of work to upgrade to 1.16 as it is to upgrade to 1.15.1 if like there was a vulnerable version of Go or something else that we depended upon that we had to pick up security bug and dependency, or if there was a CVE in Agones itself to fix those sorts of things.
Yeah, I guess the only time that it might be a pain to upgrade to the newest is if there's like a change to like the game server allocation spec or something like that.
Maybe we're
it would be a pain to it would be a pain to upgrade to the newest if we switched our supported Kubernetes version. So kind of coming back to our first discussion, like if
that is true,
if we said we fixed a critical bug and now you have to upgrade to Kubernetes 1.19, like that would be a lot more painful than if we backported the fix and said you can still run 1.15.1 on Kubernetes 1.18. So that's another place where having a wider range of Kubernetes versions would actually help us a lot, because then we could again have another excuse not to backport things. Yeah, because I think to me, like the biggest issue, like we're saying it's the same amount of work to roll it out, but there is sort of like the qualification issue of, does the new thing behave the same way? Like how fast am I comfortable rolling it out? If it's fixing something critical, I probably want to roll it out pretty quickly. But if it also has a lot of churn in the code base, like there's some risk to rolling out a new one versus rolling out something that is literally just like a patch fix of just a security problem. So I think the mechanic of rolling it out is the same amount of work, but the qualification level might be different between the two. And so that's where I could, especially if it's a new Kubernetes version that we're forcing you to upgrade to, like I could see somebody pushing harder for a backport of a critical security problem in that case.
Yep, 100% agree. Having a wider set of supported versions would solve, I think, is probably the more applicable solution.
Yeah. All right. If there are any other thoughts on that one, we can go to the next item, which is, Mark, I think you actually added this one yourself and put your name on it instead of me adding it for you.
I did, but it's all right. You put everything on there that I wanted to add there, so I feel like that was a great delegation of responsibilities on everyone's part. So thank you very much for doing that work. I just wanted to highlight something cool I think that's happening in the K8s, the Kubernetes PRs that I think will be useful for us and has been something I've talked about for a long time. There's work that's happening on in-place pod vertical scaling, to the point that they've moved out of KEP and actually are implementing stuff. I don't know where it's coming. I think they're targeting 1.22 from when I looked at it, but I don't know whether that'll land or not. But the cool thing about that is the use case for that is, like, say you're doing the classic example is, say you're doing a battle royale. So you have 100 players come in and you're like, I need 2 whole CPUs for this thing, but you only have 25 players show up. And suddenly you're like, I'm keeping up 2 whole CPUs for this when I could be running it on a quarter of that, or like whatever. What's cool then about this is you could do in-place vertical scaling, where you could say, okay, fine, I start with the maximum amount that I have, but based on the amount of players I have, now I can say, actually, I only need 3/4 of a CPU. Scale that down. That now means that I now have more room in my cluster, or more room on that node to actually add more machines, more game servers, and so I can take a better advantage of like all the space I have on my Kubernetes cluster. So yeah, once that lands, I'm sure we'll do some work to try and probably take a game server and be able to expand that out in some way, shape, or form. But I just thought it was cool, and I'm glad to see it's coming.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, I think since Agones' inception, I've had this question come up more than once, and I was like, "There's a cap. It's been 4 years, but it's still going."
So you mentioned the case where you over provision. Is there? I think there's also the use case for under provisioning and saying like, I need to add a little more. Do we have like a strong use case where we think that would happen, where you'd want to vertically scale up, or do we generally think that scaling down is going to be more common?
So I need to go in through the cap again. I'm trying to work out whether what happens if you don't have room to scale up. So like I need, so if say you have other things in the cluster and you try and scale up, does that A, reject you because you don't have room? Does that B, kick off a game server? And if it does, that could be a bad thing. So I don't know what the controls look like for that, and what that looks like. So I should probably actually go dig in, but or whether even you have an option of like which one would you choose and how.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because they do have like priority classes and priority and preemption and all that sort of stuff working. Because I know Alex filed an issue a while back saying like an allocated game server can get killed if it gets preempted by a pod with a higher priority class, right? And
there's a resize policy and like restart not required. Yeah, there's some weird stuff in here. Like I think like if the resize, if restart not required in any place resize that may result in the container being stuffed, not restarted if it can't resize to a bigger size. Yeah, there's some fun stuff in here. Pod restart policy is never the resize must be set to restart, not required to pass validation. Makes sense because a lot of our stuff has restart never. Actually, no, it's not. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. This is gonna be. It'll be fun to dig through it. So,
I had a question about this is about sort of like resource usage and making the most use of your resources in your cluster. There's also cases where like, say you've got a bunch of like lobby servers. It was prime time, a bunch of people were playing and getting into your lobby servers, and then after prime time is over, you've got these servers sitting around with sparse populations. Do we have any sort of way to signal to the game server to like try and like migrate players to a different game server so you can kind of reach a higher population density on a single server and then take some servers offline?
I think that's going to come down to your game.
Okay.
I mean, we'll have, once we have all the player tracking stuff stable, we could probably put some stuff in there to like help route people and stuff, and you'll have maybe a better understanding of where players are at. But yeah, we're an orchestration platform. It's up to you to do communication stuff.
Sure. Yeah, the communication, coordinating with the client, telling the client like, hey, it's time for you to move over to this other lobby server or whatever. I understand that part would be like,
what could be cool is if you're using player tracking, you could do one thing you could do is have like a little mini controller sitting around inside your cluster that like looks at how many players you have on each one versus like all the other ones, and like sets a label or an annotation or something that communicates to that game server like, hey, tell all these players they need to go to this different one that we've decided that's the one we want everyone to go to, and does that coordination for you. That'd be kind of neat. Yeah,
I was thinking like the Agones API could be the communication vector to the game server. Like, hey, Agones has decided that your game server should go offline and your players should go to this other game server. So please start making your migration.
Yeah.
And take yourself offline after you've done that.
But yeah, you could do that with an external controller. Like, I don't think it has to necessarily be part of Agones.
Okay.
Because once you have that player information, I mean, if you're storing your player tracking information outside of Agones too, then you're just communicating between the two systems. And Just every so often go poll your player tracking data and be like, where is it at? All right, let's and then yeah, you can then go set labels and do all sorts of fun stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it would, the other thing that makes that tricky for like Agones itself, and I'm just spitballing off the top of my head, is like we could have some probably basic rules around like, hey, you want to consolidate players based on like numbers of players, but you might have other rules that are relevant for your game about where your players should be going, that we can't necessarily track. But I also wonder if you have any interesting ideas, because I think maybe in a more general sense, there is something we could do to be like, drain this game server somehow, or something like some sort of drain state for a game server or something like that maybe is a bit more widely applicable. I don't know. Just throwing ideas around. Just rolling ideas around in my head. Something like that.
Yeah, something to think about some more, I think. Cool. All right. Yeah, we'll look at maybe doing some of that on our own then. Thanks.
Yeah, as a sort of meta note, it feels like one of the things that keeps coming up that the thing I keep saying a lot is like, that seems like a really good idea. You could write that as a third-party open source solution and publish it. And depending on how much traction that gets, maybe that's something that we then pull in later. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of core. So I keep saying stuff like that a lot. So which I think is a good sign of the maturity of the platform. As people get more and more niche use cases and more opinionated solutions, and we just start building more extra blocks and stuff. And like we have a third-party section for a reason, so I think that's pretty awesome.
Cool.
Akil,
yeah,
Akil, you put your hand up. Did you wanna say hi?
Hi, I'm Akhil. I was searching that how the how the this open world games work. So the Agones open source software had came out that they back works on Kubernetes. Uh, so it is an
I'm
open
sorry,
source.
Akil. Could you turn the music off that you have in the background? It's making it really hard for us to hear you. Thank you so much. Or if that's not possible, feel free to drop a question in chat. Maybe that might be a bit easier.
or maybe just get a little closer to the microphone.
Yeah, that could work too.
Now it's okay. Hello. It's okay. I'm audible.
That's a bit better.
Yeah, that's better.
So I'm an student and I want to contribute in this open source project and I don't know. I had gone to GitHub repository, but what I have to prerequisite for it, or what will I have to do for because I find very uh, overwhelming the project. So what can I just I found this a schedule of this community meeting, so I thought just can I ask for it. So it will be good. How the online multiplayer games work, back things. I was interested in this. So what will be the
Mark's muted, so I'll say something.
That's right, Robbie. You looked like you were going to say something.
Sorry. I think the best place to start, if you go to the agones.dev websites, and so read through the overview page, which is first, it sort of describes like what the project is and why it exists. And then if you go to the prerequisites knowledge page and sort of work your way through the different things that you would need to do to run Agones, I think a lot of that stuff is stuff that you should have at least some understanding of what those terms are, or at least even if you don't fully understand them, deeply, to figure out like sort of the scope of the dependencies of the project and sort of where it sits in the ecosystem, right? I think that's really important, just to kind of set yourself up for understanding how different pieces interact. And then once you feel like you kind of know, like, okay, this is what the Agones project is, here's the pieces that it builds on top of, maybe walk through like some of the quick start documentation, just to kind of go through like creating a cluster, creating a game server, creating a fleet, allocating from the fleet, like getting a sense of how the different parts work. Then if you go to the GitHub repository and look for issues that are tagged as good first issue. So there's a label, you can sort by label for good first issue. Right now there are 19 open good first issues, and pick one of those that looks like it's either aligned with something you already know or understand, like some of them are related to like the C++ code. So if you have done a lot of C++, like maybe that's a place to start. Some of them are related to Terraform or C# or something else. Pick one of those and take a crack at that. And generally we try to mark things as good first issue if we think that they'd be a good entry point to someone just starting up on the project, that don't require sort of the same level of knowledge and expertise as some of the other issues, right? So a lot of stuff we've been talking about today are things that do require a lot more expertise on game servers and how Agones works and stuff, like the stuff Mark's doing with advanced allocations, right? That would be a good place to start, right? Because it requires a huge sort of body of knowledge of understanding both of the use cases and requirements from the problem space, and then also the mechanics of like how the code works internally. But there are issues that are much simpler to do. And then the other thing I would say is updating documentation is always a great place to start. If you go through the documentation, tinkering with the website, running make site server are pretty straightforward once you've got a development environment set up, right? If you get Docker installed and you run the make command, you can get the website running locally, and you can tinker with that and make documentation changes pretty easily. And doing that and just going through the documentation and looking for places that can be fixed or cleaned up or anything like that really does help the project. And again, doesn't require a ton of expertise, and is sort of an easy way to get started. So those are the things I would suggest. Look for issues that are marked as good first issue, and go through and try to send some pull requests to update documentation. And those might be a good sort of stepping stone to both understand how does it work to contribute to the project and get a pull request sent out and get feedback and respond and get it merged, and like that sort of just basic workflow. And then also using Agones, right? Like running through the examples and using it so that when you do want to make a code change to it, you can then run that code change and verify it does what you want. So that's how I'd recommend getting started, not just for you, but for anybody who wants to get spun up on the project.
I will concur with much of that. I will say, Akhil, do not worry that it is overwhelming. That is not surprising in any way, shape, or form. This is definitely a project that is aimed at people who like know lots of stuff about lots of things about how like Kubernetes works and game servers and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, just start slow. It's all good. 100% agree with what Robert said. I will also say, yeah, if there's not a issue or a ticket that has a good first issue or whatever, right? Like, don't worry about that. If you just find something that you're like, I wish this was explained better, or it would be really nice if it was like that, create an issue, like find something that's important for you. And like come join us in Slack and ask questions in the development Slack, and we'll help you out.
Thank you for giving me an advice. I will surely look into the documentation. Also, good first issues.
I'm also digging through, I'm just like reviewing the development docs, and they're fine, but I am sure they probably also need improvement as things have changed over time. Like, I don't think you need a Go path anymore. But yeah, if you find stuff in there or anything else, yeah.
Okay.
Always good.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Welcome. Is that it? Is that everything?
We managed to use up the whole hour, although we did get started a little bit late.
Yeah, we are right up on top of that. Perfect time.
Anything you want to say in closing, April?
I was gonna say, like, is anybody gonna wrap it up, say goodbye, or?
Bye.
Bye,
Pleasure
everyone.
as
All right,
always.
thanks.
Thank you for attending yet another episode of the Agones community meeting. We'll see you all in a month's time, same place.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
All right,
Bye.
good discussion. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone.